Hello. What's up? Oh my gosh, wait, I need to get ready. I'm not ready at all. Okay, I've got my read. I've got my water. I've got my book. And I've got my phone. I've got everything. Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. Okay, I was just eating popcorn and I had to stop. That's okay. I'm fine with stopping eating my popcorn. My room looks messy. Oh no. That's okay. It's okay. Hi! Hi, how are y'all? I'm excited for tonight. We're reading a very great chapter, in my opinion. It's chapter 5. This is when Ben meets Bill and Eddie and Richie and Stan, and they all build their dam. I believe they build the dam in this chapter. If they don't, this is going to be really disappointing. Do they? Oh, they don't. Never mind. They don't build the dam. When do they build that dam? What? Oh, okay. This is really disappointing. That's okay. That's okay. They don't build the dam, but that's okay. It's fine. Ben still meets Bill and Eddie. So, and it's only 30 pages, so we will be able to get through it all. Okay. Thank you for my. You like my onesie? It's a cow onesie. This is my obviously it's a cow onesie. This was my Halloween costume in 7th grade or 8th grade. I was a holy cow. All right. Are we ready? Are we excited? I'm excited. Okay. Alrighty. Ready? Okay. Chapter 5. This is on page 225, by the way. Okay. Or 221. Chapter 5. Bill Denbrough Beats the Devil 1. Part 1. Bill Denbrough thinks, I'm damned near space traveling. I might as well be inside a bullet shot from a gun. This thought, although perfectly true, is not one he finds especially comfortable. In fact, for the first hour following the Concorde's takeoff, or perhaps liftoff would be a better way to put it, from Heathrow, he has been coping with a mild case of claustrophobia. The airplane is narrow, unsettlingly so. The meal is just short of exquisite, but the flight attendants who serve it must twist and bend and squat to get the job done. They look like a troupe of gymnasts. Watching the strenuous service takes some of the pleasure out of the food for Bill, although his seatmate doesn't seem particularly bothered. The seatmate is another drawback. He's fat and not particularly clean. Maybe it had Lapidus cologne on the top. Bill detects the unmistakable odor of dirt and sweat. He's not being particular about his left elbow either. Every now and then it strikes Bill with a soft thud. His eyes are drawn again and again into the digital readout at the front of the cabin. It shows us how fast this British bullet is going. Now, as the Concorde reaches its cruising speed, it tops out at just over Mach 2 measurement. Bill takes his pen from his shirt pocket and uses its tip to tap buttons on the computer watch Audra gave him last Christmas. If the machometer is right, and Bill has absolutely no reason to think it is not, then they are busting along at a speed of 18 miles per minute. He's not sure this is anything he really wanted to know. Outside his window, which is as small and thick as the window in one of the old Mercury space capsules, he can see a sky which is not blue, but the twilight purple of dusk, although it is the middle of the day. At the point where the sea and the sky meet, he can see that the horizon line is slightly bowed. I'm sitting here, Bill thinks, a Bloody Mary in my hand and a dirty fat man's elbow poking into my bicep, observing the curvature of the earth. He smiles a little, thinking that a man who can face something like that shouldn't be afraid of anything. But he is afraid, and not just of flying at 18 miles a minute in this narrow, fragile shell. He can almost feel Derry rushing at him, and that is exactly the right expression for it. 18 miles a minute or not, the sensation is of being perfectly still while Derry rushes at him like a big carnivore which has lain in wait for a long time and has finally broken from cover. Derry! Derry! Shall we write an ode to Derry? The stink of its mills and its rivers, the dignified quiet of its tree-lined streets, the library, the standpipe, Bassey Park, Derry Elementary School, the Barrens. Lights are going on in his head, big Kligs? I don't know what that word is. It's like he's been sitting in a darkened theater for 27 years, waiting for something to happen, and now it's finally begun. The set being revealed spot by spot, and Clyde, I don't know, like Clyde is not, however, some harmless comedy like arsenic or an old lace. To Bill Denbrough, it looks more like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. All those stories I wrote, he thinks of the stupid kind of amusement. All those novels. Derry is where they all came from. Derry was the wellspring. They came from that what happened that summer and from what happened to George the autumn before. All the interviewers that had ever asked me that question, I gave them the wrong answer. The fat man's elbow digs into him again, and he spills some of his drink. Bill almost says something, but then thinks better of it. That question, of course, was, where do you get your ideas? It was a question Bill supposed all writers of fiction had to answer, or pretend to answer, at least twice a week, but a fellow like him who made a living by writing of things which never were and never could be, had to answer it, or pretend to, much more often than that. All writers have a pipeline which goes down to the subconscious, he told them, neglecting to mention that he doubted more as each year passed, even if there was such a thing as a subconscious. But the man or woman who writes horror stories has a pipeline that goes farther, maybe, into the subconscious, if you like. Elegant answer, that, but no one. Wait. Elegant answer, that, but one had he ever believed. Wait. Elegant answer, that, but one he had never really believed. Subconscious? Well, there was something down there, all right, but Bill thought people had made much too big a deal out of the function of which was probably the mental equivalent of your eyes watering when dust got in them, or breaking wind in an hour or so after dinner. The second metaphor was probably the better of the two, but you couldn't very well tell interviewers that as far as you were concerned, such things as dreams and vague longings and sensations like déjà vu really came down to nothing more than a bunch of mental farts. But they seemed to need something. All those reporters with their notebooks and their little Japanese tape recorders, and Bill wanted to help them as much as he could. He knew that writing was a hard job, a damned hard job. There was no need to make theirs harder by telling them, my friend, you might as well ask me who cut the cheese, and have done with it. He thought now, you always knew they were asking the wrong question, even before Mike called. Now you also know what the right question was. Not where do you get your ideas, but why do you get your ideas? There was a pipeline, all right, but it wasn't either the Freudian or Jungian version of the subconscious that it came out of. No interior drain system of the mind, no subterranean cavern full of Morlocks waiting to happen. There was nothing at the other end of that pipe but Derry. Just Derry and who's that, trip-trapping upon my bridge? He sits bolt upright suddenly, and this time it's his elbow that goes wandering. It sinks deeply into his fat mate's side for a moment. Watch yourself, buddy, the fat man says. Close quarters, you know. Could you stop whapping with yours, and I'll try to stop whapping you with mine. The fat man gives him a sour, incredulous, what the hell are you talking about look. Bill simply gazes at him until the fat man looks away, muttering, Who's there? Who's trip-trapping over my bridge? He looks out the window again and thinks, we're beating the devil. His arms and the nape of his neck prickle. He knocks back the rest of his drink in one swallow. Another of those big lights is gone. Silver, his bike. That was what he'd called it after the Lone Ranger's horse, a big Schwinn, 28 inches tall. You'll clear yourself on that, Billy, his father had said, but with no real concern in his tone. He had been shown little concern for anything. He had shown little concern for anything since George's death. Before, he had been tough. Fair, but tough. Since you could get around him. He would make fatherly gestures, go through fatherly motions, but motions and gestures were all they were. It was like he was already listening for George to come back into the house. It's like he was always listening for George to come back into the house. Bill had seen in the window of the bike and cycle shop down Center Street. It leaned gloomily on its kickstand, bigger than the biggest of the others on display. Dull where they were shiny, straight in places where others were curved. bent in places where the others were straight. Propped on its front tire had been a sign, "Used. Make an offer." What actually happened was that Bill went in and the owner made him an offer, which Bill took. He wouldn't have known how to dicker with the cycle shop owner if his life depended on it, and the price, $24, the man quoted, seemed very fair to Bill, generous even. He paid for Silver with the money he had saved up for the last 7 or 8 months. Birthday money, Christmas money, lawn mowing money. He had been noticing the bike in the window ever since Thanksgiving. He paid for it and wheeled it home as soon as the snow began to melt for good. It was funny, because he never thought much about owning a bike before last year. The idea seemed to come to his mind all at once. Perhaps one of those endless days after George was murdered. In the beginning, Bill almost did kill himself. The first ride on his new bike ended with Bill dumping it on purpose to keep from running smack into the board fence at the end of Cusseth Lane. He had not been so afraid of running into the fence as he had been bashing right through it and falling 60 feet into the barrens. He came away from that with a 5-inch gash. He came away from that one with a 5-inch gash running between his wrist and elbow of his left arm. Not even a week later, he had found himself unable to brake soon enough and had shot through the intersection of Witcham and Jackson at perhaps 35 miles an hour. A little kid on a dusty gray mastodon of a bike. Silver was silver only by the most energetic reach of a willing imagination. Playing cards, machine gunning the spokes of the front and back wheels in a steady roar. And if a car had been coming, he would have been dead meat, just like Georgie. He got control of Silver little by little as the spring advanced. Neither of his parents noticed during that time that he was courting death by bicycle. He thought that after the first few days they had ceased to really see his bike at all. To them it was just a relic with chipped paint, which leaned against the garage wall on rainy days. Silver was a lot more than just some rusty old relic, though. He didn't look like much, but he went like the wind. Bill's friend, his only real friend, was a kid named Eddie Casrack. I wonder how it's Richie's dad, anyways. And Eddie was good with mechanical things. He had shown Bill how to get Silver in shape, which bolts tighten, and check regularly where to oil the sprockets, how to tighten the chain, how to put on a bike patch so it would stay if you got a flat. "You want to paint it," he remembered Eddie saying one day, but Bill didn't want to paint Silver. For reasons he couldn't explain to himself, he wanted the Schwinn just the way it was. It looked like a real Bow Wow, the sort of bike a careless kid regularly left on his lawn in the rain. A bike that would be all squeaks and shudders and slow friction. It looked like a Bow Wow, but it went like the wind. It would beat the devil, he says aloud and laughs. His fat seatmate looks at him sharply. The laugh has that howling quality that gave Audra the creeps earlier. Yes, it looked pretty shoddy, but with its old paint and the old-fashioned package carrier mounted above the back wheel, and the ancient ooga horn with its black rubber bulb. That horn was permanently welded into the handlebars with a rusty bolt the size of a baby's fist. Pretty shoddy. But could Silver go? Could be? Christ. And it was a damned good thing he could, because Silver had saved Bill Denborough's life in the 4th week of June in 1958, the week after he met Ben Hanscom for the first time, the week after he and Ben and Eddie built the dam, the week that Ben and Richie Trashmouth Tozier and Beverly Marks showed up in the Barrens after the Saturday matinee. Richie had been riding behind him on Silver's package carrier the day Silver had saved Bill's life. So he supposed Silver had saved Richie's too. He remembered the house they had been running from all right. He remembered that just fine. That damned house on Newbolt Street. He had raced to beat the devil that day. Oh yeah, for sure. Don't you know it. Some devil with eyes as shiny as old deadly coins. Some hairy old devil with a mouthful of bloody teeth. But all that had come later. If Silver had saved Richie's life and his own that day, then perhaps he had saved Eddie's on the day Bill and Eddie met Ben by the kicked-apart remains of their dam in the Barrens. Henry Bowers, who looked a little bit like someone had run him through a disposal, had mashed Eddie's nose, and then Eddie's asthma had come on strong, and his aspirator turned up empty. So it had been Silver That day, too, Silver to the rescue. Bill Denbrough, who wasn't on a bicycle in almost 17 years, looked out the window of an airplane that would not have been credited or even imagined outside of a science fiction magazine in the year 1958. Hi-ho, Silver, away, he thinks, and he has to close his eyes against the sudden needling sting of tears. What happened to Silver? He can't remember. That part of the set is still dark. That Klieg, I don't know, Klieg, I don't know what that is, has yet to be turned on. Perhaps that is just as well. Perhaps that is a mercy. Hi-ho. Hi-ho, Silver. Hi-ho, Silver, away, he shouted. Part 2. The wind tore the words back over his shoulder like a fluttering crepe streamer. They came out big and strong, those words, in a triumphant roar. They were the only ones that ever did. He pedaled down Kansas Street to town, gaining speed slowly at first. Silver rolled once he got going, but getting going was a job and a half. Watching the gray bike pick up speed was a little like watching a big plane roll down the runway. At first, you couldn't believe such a huge, waddling gadget could ever actually leave the earth. The idea was absurd. But then you could see its shadow beneath it, and before you had even had time to wonder if it was a mirage, the shadow was trailing out long behind it, and the plane was up, cutting its way through the air as sleek and graceful as a dream in a satisfied mind. Silver was like that. Bill got a little downhill stretch and began to pedal faster, his legs pumping up and down as he stood forward over his bike's fork. He had learned very quickly, after being bashed a couple of times by that fork in the worst place a boy can be bashed, to yank his underpants up as high as he could before mounting Silver. Later that summer, observing this process, Bill would say, Bill does that because he thinks he might have... Wait, let me actually have a voice. Bill does that because he thinks he might like to have some kids that live someday. Seems like a bad idea to me, but hey, he might always take after his wife, right? He and Eddie had lowered the seat as far as it would go, and it now bumped and scraped against the small of his back as he worked the pedals. The woman digging weeds in her flower garden shaded her eyes to watch him pass. She smiled a little. The boy on the huge bike reminded her of a monkey she had seen riding a unicycle in the Barnum and Bailey circus. He's apt to kill himself, though, she thought, running back to her garden. That bike is too big for him. It was none of her problem, though. Part 3. Okay, part 3, for realsies. Bill had had more sense than to argue with the big boys when they broke out of the bushes, looking like ill-tempered hunters on the track of a beast which had already mauled one of them. Eddie, however, had rashly opened his mouth, and Henry Bowers had unloaded on him. Bill knew who they were, all right. Henry, Belch, and Victor were just about the worst kids in Derry School. They had beaten up on Richie Tozier, who Bill sometimes chummed with a couple of times. The way Bill looked at it, this was partially Richie's own fault. He was not known as Trash Mouth for nothing. One day in April, Richie had said something about their collars as the three of them had passed by in the schoolyard. The collars had been turned up, just like Vic Morrow's in the Blackboard Jungle. Bill, who had been sitting against the building nearby and listlessly shooting a few marbles, hadn't really caught all of it. Neither did Henry and his friends, but they heard enough to turn in Richie's direction. Bill supposed Richie had meant to say whatever he said in a low voice. The trouble was, Richie didn't really have a low voice. "What do you say, little four-eyed geek?" Victor Chris inquired. "I didn't say nothing," Richie said, and that disclaimer, along with his face, which looked quite sensibly dismayed and scared, might have ended it. Except that Richie's mouth was like a half-tamed horse that has a way of bolting for absolutely no reason at all. Now it was suddenly added, "You ought to dig that wax out of your ears, big fella. Want some blasting powder?" They stood looking at him incredulously for a moment, and then they took after him. Stuttering Bill had watched the unequal race from its start to its preordained conclusion from his place against the side of the building. No sense getting involved. Those three galoots would be just as happy to beat up on two kids for the price of one. Richie ran diagonally across the little kid's play yard, leaping over the teeter-totters and dodging among the swings, realizing that he had run into a blind alley only when he struck the chain-link fence between the play yard and the park which abutted the school grounds. So he tried to go up the chain link, all clutching fingers and pointing seeking sneaker toes, and he was maybe two-thirds of the way to the top when Henry and Victor Chris hauled him back down again. Henry getting him by the back of the jacket and Victor grabbing the seat of his jeans. Richie was screaming when they peeled him off the fence. He hit the asphalt on his back. His glasses flew off. He reached for them, and Belch Huggins kicked them away, and that's why one of the boughs was mended with adhesive tape for this summer. Bill had winced and walked to the front of the building. He had observed Mrs. Moran, one of the fourth-grade teachers, already hurrying over to break things up, but he knew they would get Richie hard before then. By the time she actually arrived, Richie would be crying. Ball, baby, look at the baby ball. Bill had only minor problems with them. They made fun of his stutter, of course, and occasional random cruelty came with the jibes. One rainy day, as they were going to lunch in the gym, Belch Huggins had knocked Bill's lunch bag out of his hands and had stomped it flat with one engineer boot, squishing everything inside. "Oh, gee!" Belch cried in a mock horror, raising his hands and fluttering them about his face. "Sorry about your lunch, fuck face." Oh, it doesn't say fuck face. Oh, it does. Yeah, I got it. And he had strolled off down the hall toward where Victor Crisp was leaning against the drinking fountain outside the boys' room door, just about laughing himself into a hernia. That hadn't been so bad, though. Bill had caged half a PB&J off of Eddie Kasprak, and Richie was happy to give him his deviled egg, one of which his mother packed in his lunch about every second day, and which made him want to puke, he claimed. And he says that Richie wasn't one of his friends? Okay. But you had to stay out of their way, and if you couldn't do that, you had to try and be invisible. Eddie forgot the rules, so they framed him. He hadn't been too bad until the big boys went downstream and splashed across to the other side, even though his nose was bleeding like a fountain. When Eddie's snot rag was soaked through, Bill had given him his own and made him put a hand on the nape of his neck and lean his head back. Remember snot rags? Well, I don't remember snot rags, but that was a thing. People would carry on rags in case their nose was running. That's hilarious. Anyways, Bill could remember his mother getting Georgie to do that because Georgie sometimes got nosebleeds. Oh, but it hurt to think about Georgie. It wasn't until the sound of the big boy's buffalo-like progress through the barrens had died away completely and Eddie's nosebleed had actually stopped that his asthma got bad. He started heaving for air, his hands opening and then snapping shut like weak traps, his respiration a fluting whistle in his throat. "Shit!" Eddie gasped. "Asthma! Cripes!" Is that how you say it, cripes? Yeah. He scrambled for his aspirator and finally got it out of his pocket. It looked almost like a bottle of Windex, the kind with a spray attachment at the top. He jammed it into his mouth and punched the trigger. "Better?" Bill asked anxiously. "No, it's empty." Eddie looked at Bill with panicked eyes that said, "I'm caught, Bill, I'm caught." The empty aspirator rolled away from his hand. The stream chuckled on, not carrying in the leaves that Eddie Kasprak could barely breathe. Bill thought randomly that the big boys had been right about one thing. It had been a real baby dam. But they had been having fun, damn it, and he suddenly felt a dull fury that it should have come to this. "Take it easy, Eddie," he said. For the next 40 minutes or so, Bill sat next to him. His expectation that Eddie's asthma attack would at any moment let up at gradually fading into unease. Okay. By the time Ben Hanscom appeared, the unease had become real fear. It not only wasn't letting up, it was getting worse. And the Center Street drug where Eddie got his refills was 3 miles away almost. What if he went to get Eddie's stuff and came back to find Eddie unconscious? Unconscious or don't think that. Or even dead, his mind insisted implacably. Dead like Georgie. Don't be such an asshole. He's not going to die. No, probably not. But what if he came back and found Eddie in a comber? Bill knew about combers. He had even deduced they were named after those great big waves guys surfed on in Hawaii, and that seemed right enough after all. It and that seemed right enough. After all, what was a comber but a wave that drowned your brain? On doctor shows like Ben Casey, people were always going to combers, and sometimes they stayed there in spite of all Bill Casey's ill-tempered shouting. So he sat there, knowing he ought to go. He couldn't leave. Knowing he ought to go, he couldn't do Eddie any good staying here, but not wanting to leave him alone. An irrational, superstitious part of him felt sure that Eddie would slip into the comber the minute Bill, turned his back. And then he looked upstream and saw Ben Hanscom sitting there. He knew who Ben was, of course. The fattest kid in any school he has his or her own sort of unhappy notoriety. Ben was in the other 5th grade. Bill sometimes saw him at recess, standing by himself, usually in a corner, looking at a book and eating his lunch out of a bag about the size of a laundry sack. Looking at Ben now, Bill thought he looked even worse than Henry Bowers. Sorry to believe, but true. Bill could not begin to imagine the cataclysmic fight between those two that these two have been in. Bill could not even begin to imagine the cataclysmic fight these two must have been in. Ben's hair stood up wild, dirt-clotted spikes. His sweater or sweatshirt, it was hard to tell which it had started the day as, and it was sure as shit didn't matter now. Was a matted ruin, smeared with a sicko mixture of blood and grass. His pants were out at the knees. He saw Bill looking at him and recoiled for a bit, eyes going wary. Don't go, Bill cried. He put his empty hands up in the air, palms out to show he was harmless. We need some help. My stutter. Ugh, okay. Ben came closer, eyes still wary. He walked as if one or both of his legs were killing him. Are they gone? Bowers and those guys? Yes, Bill said. Listen, can you stay here with my friend while I go get his medicine? He's got asthma? Bill nodded. Ben came all the way down to the remains of the dam and dropped painfully to one knee beside Eddie, who was lying back with his eyes mostly closed and his chest heaving. Which one hit him? Ben asked finally. He looked up, and Bill knew the same frustrated anger he had been feeling himself on the fat kid's face. Was it Henry Bowers? Bill nodded. It figures. Sure, go on. I'll stay with him. Thanks. Oh, don't thank me, Ben said. I'm the reason they landed on you in the first place. Go on, hurry up. I have to be home for supper. Bill went without saying anything else. It would have been good to tell Ben not to take it to heart. What had happened hadn't been Ben's fault or anything. It would have been good to not tell Ben to take. It would have been good to tell Ben not to take it to heart. What had happened hadn't been Ben's fault any more than it had been Eddie's for stupidity opening his mouth. Guys like Henry and his buddies were an accident waiting to happen. Little kids' version of floods or tornadoes or gallstones. It would have been good to say that, but he was so tightly wound right now that it would have taken him about 20 minutes or so, and by then Eddie might have slipped into a comber. That was another thing Bill learned from Doctors Casey and Kildare. You never went into a comber, you always slipped into one. He trotted downstream, glancing back once. He saw Ben Hanscom grimly collecting rocks from the edge of the water. For a moment, Bill couldn't figure out what he was doing, and then he understood. It was an ammo dump, just in case they came back. The Barrens were no mystery to Bill. He had played here a lot this spring, sometimes with Richie, more frequently with Eddie, sometimes all by himself. He had by no means explored the whole area, but he could find his way back to Kansas Street from the Kenduskeag with no trouble, and now did. He came out a wooded bridge where Kansas Street crossed one of the little no-name streams that flowed out of Dairy drainage system and into the Kenduskeag down below. Silver was stashed under this bridge, his handlebars tied to one of the bridge supporters with a hank of rope to keep his wheels out of the water. Oh, sorry, this is part 4. Oopsie doopsie. Did I say that? I don't remember. Bill untied the rope, stuck it in his shirt, and hauled Silver up to the sidewalk by main force, panting and sweating, losing his balance a couple of times and landing on his tail. But at last it was up. Bill swung his leg over the high fork, and as always, once he was on Silver, he became someone else. Part 5. Hi-ho, Silver, away! The words came out deeper than his normal speaking voice. It was almost always the voice of a man he would become. It was almost the voice of a man he would become. Silver gained speed slowly, the quickening clickety-clack of the bicycle playing cards close-pinned to the spokes, marking the increase. Bill stood on the pedals, his hands clammed on the bike grips with the wrists turned up. He looked like a man trying to lift a stupendously heavy barbell. Cords stood out on his neck, veins pulsed in his temples. His mouth was turned down, a trembling sneer of effort as he fought the familiar battle against weight and inertia, busting his brains to get Silver moving. As always, it was worth the effort. Silver began to roll along more briskly. His houses slid past smoothly instead of just poking by. On his left where Kansas Street crossed Jackson, the unfettered Kenduskeag became the canal. Past the intersection, Kansas Street headed swiftly downhill toward Center and Main, Derry's business district. Streets crossed frequently here, but they were all stop signed by Bill's favor, and the possibility that a driver might one day blow one of those stop signs and flatten him into a fleeting shadow on the street had never crossed Bill's mind. It is unlikely he would have changed his ways even if it had. He might have done so either earlier or later in his life, but this spring and early summer had been a strange, thundery time for Bill. For him. Oh, my eyes. Ben would have been astounded if someone were to ask him if he was lonely. Bill would have been likewise astounded if someone asked him if he was courting death. Of course not, he would have responded immediately and indignantly. But that did not change the fact that his runs down Kansas Street to town had become more and more like bonsai charges as the weather warmed. This section of Kansas Street was known as Up Mile Hill. Bill took it at full speed, bent over Silver's handlebars to cut down the wind resistance, one hand poised over the cracked rubber bulb of his Uga horn to warn the unwary, his red hair blowing back from his head in a rippling wave. The click of the playing cards had mounted to a steady roar. The effortful sneer had become a big goofball grin. The residents of the right had given way to business buildings, warehouses and meatpacking plants, most of them, which blurred by in a scary but satisfying rush. To his left, the canal was a wink of fire in the corner of his eye. "Hi-ho, Silver, away!" he screamed triumphantly. Silver flew over the first curbing, and as they almost always did at that point, his feet lost contact with the pedals. He was freewheeling, now wholly in the lap of whatever god has been appointed the job of protecting small boys. He swerved into the street, doing maybe 15 miles an hour with the posted speed of 25. It was all behind him now. His stutter, his dad's blank-hurt eyes as he puttered around his garage workshop, the terrible sight of the dust on the closed piano cover upstairs, dusty because his mother didn't play anymore. The last time I'd been at George's funeral, 3 Methodist hymns. George going out into the rain wearing his yellow slicker, carrying the newspaper boat with its glaze of paraffin. Mr. Garner coming up the street 20 minutes later with his body blood-stained quilt. His mother's agonized shriek. All behind him. He was the Lone Ranger. He was John Wayne. He was Bo Diddley. He was anybody he wanted to be and nobody. He cried and got scared and wanted his mother. Silver flew, and stuttering Bill Denbrough flew with him. Their gantry-like shadow fled behind them. They raced down up Mile Hill together, and playing cards roared. Bill's feet found the pedals again and began to pump, wanting to go even faster, wanting to reach some hypothetical speed, not of sound, but of memory, and crash through the pain barrier. He raced on, bent over the handlebars, and raced to beat the devil. The three-way intersection of Kansas, Center, and Main was coming up fast. It was a horror of one-way traffic and conflicting signs and stoplights which were supposed to be timed but really weren't. The result, a daring news editorial had proclaimed the year before, was a traffic rotary conceived in hell. As always, Bill's eyes flickered right and left, fast, gauging the traffic flow, looking for the holes. If his judgment was mistaken, if he stuttered, you might say, he would be badly hurt or killed. He arrowed into the slow-moving traffic which clogged the intersection, running a red light and fading to the right to avoid a lumbering port-holed Buick. He shot a bullet of a glance back over his shoulder to make sure the middle lane was empty. He looked forward again and saw that in roughly 5 seconds he was going to crash into the rear end of a pickup truck that he had stopped squarely in the middle of the intersection, while the Uncle Ike type behind the wheel craned his neck to read all the signs to make sure he hadn't taken a wrong turn and somehow ended up in Miami Beach. The lane on Bill's right was full of a Bangor dairy. The lane on Bill's right was full of a Derry Bangor intercity bus. He slipped in that direction just the same and shot the gap between the stopped pickup and the bus, still moving at 40 miles an hour. At the last second, he snapped his head hard to one side, like a soldier doing an overenthusiastic eyes right, to keep the mirror mounted on the passenger side of the pickup, rearranging his teeth. Hot diesel from the bus laced his throat like a kick of strong liquor. He heard a thin, gasping squeal as one of his bike grips kissed the line up the coach's aluminum side. He got just a glimpse of a bus driver, his face paper white under his peaked Hudson Bus Company hat. The driver was shaking his fist at Bill and shouting something. Bill doubted it was happy birthday. Here was a trio of old ladies crossing Main Street from the New England Bank side to the Shoeboat side. They heard the harsh buzz of the playing cards and looked up. Their mouths dropped open as a boy on a huge bike passed within half a foot of them like a mirage. The worst and the best of the trip was behind him now. He had looked at the very real possibility of his own death again, and again had found himself able to look away. The bus had not crushed him. He had not killed himself and the 3 old ladies with their freezes shopping bags and their Social Security checks. It mentioned freezes! Freezes? Yeah, freezes! That's how you pronounce it, I think. That's the shirt that Richie has, the gray shirt, the freezes shirt. It's a department store in Bangor. Or it was. It's not anymore. It was, though. Ah, that's so cool. I didn't realize they didn't mention it in the book, and that's why they chose it. That's literally so cool. Anyways, he had not been splattered across the tailgate of Uncle Ike's old Dodge pickup. He was going uphill again, speed bleeding away. Something, call it desire, that was good enough, wasn't it? Was bleeding away with it. All the thoughts and memories were catching up. Hi, Bill. Gee, we almost lost. All the thoughts and memories were catching up. Hi, Bill. Gee, we almost lost sight of you for a while there, but here we are. Rejoining him, climbing up his shirt and jumping into his ear and whooshing into his brain like little kids going down a slide. He could feel them settling into their accustomed places, their feverish bodies jostling each other. Gosh, wow! Here we are inside Bill's head again. Let's think about George. Okay, who wants to start? You think too much, Bill. No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was he imagined too much. He turned into Richard's Alley and came out on Center Street a few moments later, pedaling slowly, feeling the sweat on his back and in his hair. He dismounted Silver in front of the Center Street drugstore and went inside. This isn't the end, I'm just taking a trip. My eyes are starting to stop working. Oh no, it's only been half an hour. And we're like halfway through. Alright. Let's see if my eyes will bear with me. Part 6. Before George's death, Bill would have gotten the salient points across to Mr. Keene by speaking to him. The druggist was not exactly kind, or at least Bill had an idea he was not, but he was patient enough and did not tease or make fun. But now Bill's stutter was much worse, and he really was afraid something bad might happen to Eddie if he didn't move fast. So when Mr. Keene said, "Hello, Billy Denbrough, can I help you?" Bill took a folder advertising vitamins, turned it over, and wrote on the back, "Eddie Kasprak and I were playing in the Barrens. He's got a bad asthma attack. I mean, he can hardly breathe. Can you give me a refill on his aspirator?" Also, a lot of this is spelled wrong. Not a lot of it, a couple of things. He pushed the note across the glass-topped counter to Mr. Keene, who read it, looked at Bill's anxious blue eyes, and said, "Of course. Wait right here, and don't be handling anything you shouldn't." Bill shifted impatiently from one foot to the other while Mr. Keene was behind the rear counter. Although he was back there less than 5 minutes, it seemed an age before he returned with one of Eddie's plastic squeeze bottles. He handed it over to Bill, smiled, and said, This should take care of the problem. Th- Thanks, Bill said. I don't have any. Mm. That's all right, son. Mrs. Casback has an account here. I'll just add this on. I'm sure she'll want to thank you for your kindness. Bill, much relieved, thanked Mr. Keene and left quickly. Mr. Keene came around the corner to watch him go. He saw Bill toss the aspirin into his bike basket and mount clumsily. Can he actually ride a bike that big? Mr. Keene wondered. I doubt it very much. But the Denver kid somehow got it going without falling on his head and pedaled slowly away. The bike, which looked to Mr. Keene like somebody's idea of a joke, wobbled madly from side to side. The aspirator rolled back and forth in the basket. Mr. Keene grinned a little. If Bill had seen that grin, it might have gone a good way toward confirming his idea that Mr. Keene was not exactly one of the world's champion nice guys. It was sour, the grin of a man who has found much to wonder about, but almost nothing to uplift in the human condition. Yes, he would add Eddie's asthma medication to Sonia Casbrack's bill, and as always, she would be surprised, suspicious rather than grateful at how cheap the medication was. Other drugs were so dear, she said. Mrs. Casbrack, Mr. Keene knew, was one of those people who believed nothing cheap could do a person much good. He could have really soaked her for her son's hydrox mist, and there had been times where he had been tempted, but why should he make himself a party to the woman's foolishness? It wasn't as though he was going to starve. Cheap? Well, my yes. Hydrox mist, administer as needed, typed neatly on the gummed label he pasted on each aspirator bottle, was wonderfully cheap. But even Mrs. Casbrack was willing to admit that it controlled her son's asthma quite well in spite of that fact. It was cheap because it was nothing but a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, and a dash of camphor added to give the mist a faint medicinal taste. In other words, Eddie's asthma medicine was tap water. Part 7. It took Bill longer to get back because he was going uphill. In several places he had to dismount and push Silver. He simply didn't have the muscle power to necessarily keep the bike going up more than mild slopes. By the time he had stashed his bike and made it back to the stream, it was 4:10. All sorts of black suppositions were crossing his mind. The handsome kid would have deserted, leaving Eddie to die, or the bullies could have backtracked and beaten the shit out of both of them, or, worst of all, the man whose business was murdering kids might have gotten one or both of them, as he knew had gotten George. He knew there had been a great deal of gossip and speculation about that. Bill had a bad stutter, but he wasn't deaf, although people sometimes seemed to think maybe he was, since he spoke only when absolutely necessary. Some people felt that the murder of his brother wasn't related at all to the murders of Betty Ripson, Cheryl LaMonica, Matthew Clements, and Veronica Grogan. Others claimed that George, Ripson, and LaMonica had been killed by one man, and the other two were the work of a copycat killer. A third school of thought held that the boys had been killed by one man, the girls by another. Bill believed they had been killed by the same person, if it was a person. He sometimes wondered about that, as he sometimes wondered about his feelings concerning Derry this summer. Was it still the aftermath of George's death, the way his parents seemed to ignore him now, so lost in their grief over their younger son that they couldn't see the simple fact that Bill was still alive, might be hurting himself? Those things combined with the other murders, the voices that sometimes seemed to speak in his head now, whispering to him, and surely they were not variations of his own voice, for these voices did not stutter. They were quiet, but they were sure, advising him to do certain things but not others. Was it those things which made Derry seem somehow different now? Somehow threatening, with unexplored streets that did not invite but seemed instead to yawn in a kind of ominous silence? They made some faces look secret and frightened. He didn't know, but he believed, as he believed all the murders were the work of a single agency, that Derry really had changed, and that his brother's death had signaled the beginning of that change. The black suppositions in his head came from the lurking idea that anything could happen in Derry now. Anything. But when he came around the last bend, all looked cool. Ben Hanscom was still there, sitting beside Eddie. Eddie himself was sitting up now, his hands dangling in his lap, head bent, still wheezing. The sun had sunk low enough to project long green shadows across the stream. Boy, that was quick. Boy, that was quick, Ben said, standing up. I didn't expect you for another half an hour. I got a fast bike, Bill said with some pride. For a moment, the two of them looked at each other cautiously, warily. Then Ben smiled tentatively, and Bill smiled back. The kid was fat, but he seemed okay. And he seemed put. It must have taken some guts with Henry and his JD friends maybe still wandering around out there someplace. Bill winked at Eddie, who was looking at him with dumb gratitude. Here you go, Eddie. He tossed in the aspirator. Eddie plunged into his open mouth, triggered it, and gasped convulsively. Then he leaned back, eyes shut. Ben watched this with concern. Geez, he's really got it bad, doesn't he? Bill nodded. I was scared there for a while, Ben said in a low voice. I was wondering what to do if he had a convulsion or something. Kept trying to remember the stuff they told us in that Red Cross assembly we had in April. All I could come up with was put a stick in his mouth so he wouldn't bite off his tongue. I think that's for epileptics. Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. He won't have a convulsion anyway, Bill said. That medicine will fix him right up. Look. I can't do a stutter. Oh, I'm so bad at it. Eddie's labored breathing at ease. He opened his eyes and looked up at them. Thanks, Bill, he said. That one was a real piswa. I guess it started when they creamed your nose, huh? Ben asked. Eddie laughed ruefully, stood up, and stuck the aspirator in his back pocket. I wasn't even thinking about my nose. I was thinking about my mom. Yeah? Really? Ben sounded surprised, but his hand went to the rags dispatcher and began fiddling there nervously. She's going to take one look at the blood on my shirt and have me down at the emergency room at Derry Home in about 5 seconds. Why? Ben asked. Stopped, didn't it? Gee, I remember this kid I was in kindergarten with, Scooter Morgan, and he got a bloody nose when he fell off the monkey bars. They took him to the emergency room, but only because it kept bleeding. Yeah? Bill asked, interested. Did he die? No, but he was out of school a week. Doesn't matter if it stopped or not, Eddie said gloomily. She'll take me anyway. She'll think it's broken, I got pieces of bone sticking in my brain or something. Can you get bones in your brain? Bill asked. This was turning to the most interesting conversation he's had in weeks. I don't know. If you listen to my mother, you can get anything. Eddie turned to Ben again. She takes me down to the emergency room about once or twice a month. I hate that place. There was this orderly once. He told her they ought to make her pay rent. She was really PO'd. Wow, Ben said. He thought Eddie's mother must be really weird. He was unconscious of the fact that now both of his hands were feeling with the remains of his sweatshirt. Why don't you just say no? Say something like, hey, Ma, I feel all right. I just want to stay home and watch Sea Hunt. Something like that. Aw, Eddie said uncomfortably and said no more. You're Ben Hanscom, right? Bill asked. Yeah, you're Bill Denbrough. Yes. And this is Eddie Kasprak, Eddie said. I hate it when you said my name, Bill. You sound like Elmer Fudd. That's like my favorite line of the miniseries. It's in the book, though, too. Sorry. Well, I'm pleased to meet you both, Bennett said. It came out sounding prissy and a little lame. A silence fell amid the three of them. It was not entirely uncomfortable silence. In it, they became friends. Were those guys chasing you? Eddie asked at last. They're always chasing someone, Bill said. I hate those fuckers. Ben was silent a moment, mostly in admiration, before Bill's use of what Ben's mother sometimes called the really bad word. Ben had never really said the really bad word out loud in his whole life, although he had written it in extremely small letters on a telephone pole on the Halloween before last. Bowers ended up sitting next to me during the exams, Ben said at last. He wanted to call me off my paper. I won't let him. You must want to die young. You must want to die young, kid, Eddie said admiringly. Stuttering Bill burst out laughing. Ben looked at him sharply, decided he wasn't being laughed at exactly. It's hard to say how he knew, but he did, and grinned. I guess I must, he said. Anyway, he's got to take summer school, and he and those other two guys were laying for me. That's what happened. You look like th they killed you," Bill said. "I fell down here from the Kansas Street, down the side of the hill," looked at Eddie. "I'll probably see you when I I'll probably see you in the emergency room, now that I think about it. When my mom gets a look at my clothes, she'll put me there." Both Bill and Eddie burst out laughing this time, and Ben joined them. It hurt his stomach to laugh, but he laughed anyway, shrilly and a little hysterically. Finally, he had to sit down on the bank, and the plopping sound his butt made when it hit the dirt got them going all over again. He liked the way his laughter sounded with theirs. It was a sound he had never heard before. Not mingled laughter, he had heard that lots of times, but mingled laughter of which his own was a part. He looked up at Bill Denbrough. Their eyes met, and that was all it took to get the both of them laughing again. Bill hitched up his pants, flipped up the collar of his shirt, and began to slouch around in a kind of moody, hoodie strut. His voice dropped low, and he said, "I'm gonna kill you, kid. Don't give me no crap. I'm dumb and big. I can crack walnuts with my forehead. I can piss vinegar and shit cement. My name's Honeybunch Bowers, and I'm the boss per ground dis here dairy parts." Eddie had collapsed into the stream bank now and was rolling around, clutching his stomach and howling. Ben was doubled up between his knees. Tears sprouted from his eyes, snot hanging from his nose in long white runners, laughing like a hyena. Bill sat down with them, and little by little the three of them quieted. "There's one really good thing about it," Eddie said presently. "If Bowers is in summer school, we won't see much of him down here." "You play in the Barrens a lot?" Ben asked. It was an idea that never would have crossed his own mind in 1,000 years, now with the reputation that the Barrens had. But now that he was down here, he didn't seem bad at all. In fact, the stretch of the low bank was very pleasant in the afternoon, as the afternoon made its slow way towards dusk. Sure, it's near. Oh, wait. Sure. It's neat. Mostly nobody bothers us down here. We goof off a lot. Bowers and those other guys don't come down here anyway. You and Eddie?" Bill shook his head. His face knotted up like a wet dish rag when he stuttered, Ben noticed, and suddenly an odd thought occurred to him. Bill hadn't stuttered at all when he was mocking the way Henry Bowers talked. "Richie!" Bill exclaimed now, paused a moment, and then went on. "Richie Tozier usually comes down too, but him and his dad was going to clean out their attic," Eddie translated, and tossed a stone into the water. Plunk. "Yeah, I know him," Ben said. "You guys come down here a lot, huh?" The idea fascinated him, made him feel a stupid sort of longing as well. "Pretty much," Bill said. "Why don't you come back down tomorrow? Me and me and Eddie we're trying to make a dam." Ben could say nothing. He was astounded not only by their offer, but by the simple and unstudied casualness with which it had come. "Maybe we ought to do something else," Eddie said. The dam wasn't working so hot anyway. Ben got up and walked down to the stream, brushing the dirt from his huge hands. There were still matted piles of small branches at either side of the stream, but anything else they'd put together had washed away. "You ought to have some boards," Ben said. "Get boards and put them in a row, facing each other, like the bread of a sandwich." Bill and Eddie were looking at him, puzzled. Ben dropped to one knee. "Look," he said. "Boards here and here. You stick them in the stream bed facing each other, okay? Then, before the water can wash away, you fill up the space between them with rocks and sand." We," Bill said. "Huh?" "We do it." "Oh," Ben said, feeling and looking, he was sure, extremely stupid. But he didn't care if he looked stupid, because he suddenly felt very happy. Couldn't remember the last time he felt this happy. "Yeah, we. Anyway, if we fill up the space in between with rocks and stuff, it'll stay. The upstream board will lean back against the rocks and dirt as as the water piles up. Second board will tip back and wash away after a while, I guess. But if we had a third board, well, look. He drew in the dirt with a stick. Bill and Eddie leaned over and studied this little drawing with sober interest. Here's the drawing. It just has the two boards and then rocks in between it, and then another board propping up the two boards, and then it has all the water to show that that stops it. Yeah. And it's labeled rocks and sand, boards, and strut. Oh, Ben Hanscom. You ever built a dam before? Eddie asked. His tone was respectful, almost odd. Nope. Then how do you know this'll work? Ben looked at Bill, puzzled. Sure it will, he said. Why wouldn't it? But how do you know? Bill asked. Ben recognized the tone of the question as one not of a sarcastic disbelief, but honest interest. How can you tell? I just know, Ben said. He looked down at his drawing in the dirt again, as if to confirm it to himself. He had never seen a cofferdam in his life, either in diagram or in fact, had no idea he had just drawn a pretty fair representation of one. Okay, Bill said, and clapped Ben on the back. See you at tomorrow. That made no sense. So see you tomorrow. What time? Me and Eddie'll get here by 8:30 or so. If me and my mom still aren't waiting in the emergency room, Eddie said inside. I'll bring some boards, Ben said. This old guy on the next block got a bunch of them. I'll hawk a few. Bring some supplies, too, Eddie said. Stuff to eat, like sandwiches. Sandwiches. Stephen King writes in, I don't remember what the technical term is, but he writes in the style where, the dialogue is said how it would be written how it would be pronounced. So, all that, it says, instead of emergency room, it just says emergency room with an M. And then it says here, sandwiches. Not sandwiches, sandwiches. Because you don't say sandwiches, you say sandwiches. So it says sandwiches. Sorry. I just find it really funny. Anyways, ring dings and, like sandwiches, ring dings, stuff like that. Okay. You got any guns? I got a daisy air rifle, Ben said. My mom gave it to me for Christmas, but she gets mad if I shoot it off in the house. Bring it down, Bill said. We'll play guns, maybe. Okay, Ben said happily. Listen, I got to split for home, you guys. Us too, Bill said. The three of them left the barrens together. Ben helped Bill push Silver up the embankment. Eddie trailed behind them, wheezing again and looking unhappily at his blood-spotted shirt. Bill said goodbye and then pedaled off, shouting, "Hi-yo, Silver, away!" at the top of his lungs. That's a gigantic bike, Ben said. Bet your fur, Eddie said. He had taken another gulp from his aspirin and was breathing normally again. He rides and he doubles sometimes on the back. Goes so fast it just about scares the crap out of me. He's a good man, Bill is. He said this last in an offhand way, but his eyes said something more empathetic. They were worshipful. You know what happened to his brother, don't you? No, what about him? Got killed last fall. Some guy killed him. Pulled one of his arms right off, just like pulling a wing off a fly. She's some crow. Bill used to only stutter a little. Now it's really bad. Did you notice he stutters? Well, a little. Sorry. But his brains don't stutter. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, I just told you because if you want Bill to be your friend, it's better not to ask him about his little brother. Don't ask him questions or anything. He's all freaked up about it. Man, I would be too, Ben said. He remembered now, vaguely, that his mother, who had been killed... He remembered now vaguely about the little kid who had been killed the previous fall. He wondered if his mother had been thinking about George Dunbrow when she gave him the watch he now wore, or only about the more recent killings. Did it happen right after the big flood? Yeah. They had reached the corner of Kansas and Jackson, where they would have to split up. Kids ran here and there, playing tag and throwing baseballs. One dorky little kid wearing big blue shorts went trotting self-importantly past Ben and Eddie, wearing a Davy Crockett coonskin backward, so that the tail hung down between his eyes. He was wearing a hula hoop and yelling, "Hoop tag, you guys! Hoop tag, wanna?" The two bigger boys looked after him amused, and then Eddie said, "Well, I gotta go." "Wait a sec," Ben said. "I got an idea, if you really don't want to go to the emergency room." "Oh, yeah?" Eddie said, looked at "Oh, yeah?" Eddie looked at Bill, doubtful but wanting to hope. "You got a nickel?" "I got a dime, so what?" Ben eyed the drying marooning splotches on Eddie's shirt. "Stop at the store and get a chocolate milk. Pour about half it on your shirt. Then when you get home, tell your mom you spilled all of it." Eddie's eyes brightened. In the 4 years since his dad had died, his mother's eyesight had worsened considerably. For reasons of vanity, and because she didn't know how to drive a car, she refused to see an optometrist and get glasses. Dried bloodstains and chocolate milk stains looked about the same. Maybe. "That might work," he said. "Just don't tell her it was my idea if she finds out." "I won't," Eddie said. "See you later, alligator." "Okay." "No," Eddie said patiently. "When I say that, you're supposed to say after a while, crocodile." "Oh, after a while, crocodile." "You got it," Eddie smiled. "You know something?" Ben said. "You guys are really cool." Eddie looked more than embarrassed. He looked almost nervous. "Bill is," he said, and started off. Aww. Ben watched him go down Jackson Street and then turned toward home. 3 blocks up the street, he saw three all too familiar figures standing at the bus stop at the corner of Jackson, on the corner of Jackson and Main. They were mostly turned away from Ben, which was damned lucky for him. He ducked behind a hedge, his heart beating hard. 5 minutes later, the Derry Newport Haven interurban bus pulled up. Henry and his friends pitched their butts into the street and swung aboard. Ben waited till the bus was out of sight and then hurried home. Just a few more pages. Let's go. I think their friendship is adorable. Oh, so cute. I love them. What's hair in my mouth? There it is. Okay. All right. Part 8. That night, a terrible thing happened to Bill Denbrough. It happened for the second time. His mom and dad were downstairs. Oh, I got water in my glasses. Whatever. Oh, that did not make it better. His mom and dad were downstairs watching TV, not talking much, sitting at either end of the couch like bookends. There had been a time where the TV opening off the kitchen would have been full of talk and laughter. Sometimes so much of both you couldn't hear the TV at all. "Shut up, Georgie," Bill would roar. "Stop hogging all the popcorn, I will," George would return. "Mom, make Bill give me the popcorn." Oh, wait. I don't know. "Bill, give him the popcorn. George, don't call me Ma. Ma's a sound." Wait, I need to start over this part. I'm so confused. "Shut up, Georgie," Bill would roar. "Stop hogging all the popcorn, I will," George would return. "Mom, make Bill give me the popcorn." "Bill, give him the popcorn. George, don't call me Ma. Ma's a sound a sheep makes." Or his dad would tell a joke and they would all laugh, even Mom. George didn't always get the jokes. Bill knew, but he laughed because everyone else was laughing. In those days, his mom and dad had also been bookends on the couch, but he and George had been the books. Bill had tried to be a book between them a while while they were watching TV since George's death, but it was cold work. They sent the cold out from both directions, and Bill's defroster was simply not big enough to cope with it. He had to leave because that kind of cold always froze his cheeks and made his eyes water. "Want to hear a joke I heard it today at school?" he asked. He had tried once some months ago. Silence from them. On television, a criminal was begging his brother, who was a priest, to hide him. Bill's dad glanced up from the tree he was looking at and glanced at Bill with mild surprise. Then he looked back down at the magazine again. There was a picture of a hunter sprawled in a snowbank and staring up at a huge, snarling polar bear. "Mauled by the Killer from the White Wastes" was the name of the article. Bill thought, I know where there's some white wastes, right between my dad and Mom on this couch." His mother had never looked up at all. "It's about how many Frenchmen it takes to ruin a light bulb. Bill plunged ahead. He felt a fine mist of sweat spring upon his forehead, as it sometimes did in school when he knew the teacher had ignored him as soon as she safely could, and must soon call on him. His voice was too loud, but he couldn't seem to lower it. The words echoed in his head like crazy chimes, echoing, jamming, spilling out again. Do you know how many? One to hold the bulb and 4 to turn the house, Zach Denbrough said absently and turned the page of his magazine. Did you say something, dear? His mother asked, and on 4-Star Playhouse the brother who was the priest told the brother who was the hoodlum to turn himself in and pray for forgiveness. Bill sat there, sweating but cold, so cold. It was cold because he wasn't really the only book between those two ends. Georgie was still there, only now it was Georgie he couldn't see. Georgie, who never demanded the popcorn or hollered that Bill was pinching. This new version of George never cut up Dickens. It was a one-armed Georgie who was palely, thoughtfully silent in the Motorola's shadowy white and blue glow. And perhaps it was not from his parents but from George that the big show was really coming. Perhaps it was George who was the real killer from the white wastes. Finally, Bill had fled from that cold, invisible brother into his room, where he lay face down in his bed and cried into his pillow. George's room was just as it had been on the day he died. Zach had put a bunch of George's toys into the cairn one day, about 2 weeks after he was buried, meaning them for the Goodwill or the Salvation Army or someplace like that, Bill supposed. Sharon Denbrough had spotted him coming out with the box in his arms, and her hands had flown to her head like startled white birds and plunged themselves deep into her hair, where they locked themselves into pulling fits. Bill had seen this and then fallen against the wall, his strength suddenly running out of his legs. His mother looked as mad as Elsa Lanchester in The Bride of Frankenstein. "Don't you dare take his things!" she had screeched. Zach flinched and then took the box of toys back from George's room without a word. He even put them back exactly the same places from which he had taken them. Bill came in and saw his father kneeling by George's bed, which his mother still changed, although only once a week now instead of twice, with his head on his hairy, muscular forearms. Bill saw his father crying, and this increased his terror. A frightening possibility suddenly occurred to him. Maybe sometimes things didn't just go wrong and then stop. Maybe sometimes they just kept going wronger and wronger until everything was totally fucked up. Dad? Go on, Bill. His voice was muffled and shaking. His back went up and down. Bill badly wanted to touch his father's back to see if perhaps his hand might be able to still the restless heaving. He did not quite dare. Go on, buzz off. He left and went creeping along the upstairs hall, hearing his mother doing her own crying down in the kitchen. The sound was shrill and helpless. Bill thought, why are they crying so far apart? And then he shoved the thought away. Part 9. On the first night of summer vacation, Bill went into George's room. His heart was beating heavily in his chest, and his legs felt stiff and awkward with tension. He came to George's room often, but that didn't mean he liked it in here. The room was so full of George's presence that it felt haunted. He came in and couldn't help thinking that the closet door might creak open at any moment, and there would be Georgie among the shirts and pants still neatly hung in there. A Georgie dressed in a rain slicker covered with red splotches and streaks. A rain slicker with one dangling yellow arm. Georgie's eyes would be blank and terrible, the eyes of a zombie in a horror movie. When he came out of the closet, his galoshes would make swishy sounds as he walked across the room toward where Bill sat in his bed, a frozen block of terror. If the power had gone out some evening while he sat here on George's bed looking at the pictures on George's wall or the models on top of George's dresser, he felt sure a heart attack, probably fatal, would ensue in the next 10 seconds or so. But he went anyway. Warring with his terror of Georgie the ghost was a mute and grasping need, a hunger to somehow get over George's death and find a decent way to go on. Not to forget George, but somehow to find a way to make him not so fucking gruesome. He understood that his parents were not succeeding very well with that, and if he was going to do it for himself, he has to do it by himself. Nor was it just for himself that he came. He came for Georgie as well. He had loved George, and for brothers they had got along pretty well. Oh, they had their pissy moments, Bill giving George a good old Indian rope burn, George shouting on Bill when Bill snuck downstairs after lights out and ate the rest of the lemon cream frosting, but mostly they got along. Bad enough that George should be dead. For him to turn George into some kind of horror monster, that was even worse. He missed the little kid, and that was the truth. Missed his voice, his laughter, missed the way George's eyes sometimes tipped confidently up to his own, sure that Bill would have whatever answers were required. And one surpassingly odd thing, there were times where he felt he loved Georgie best in his fear. Because even in his fear, his uneasy feelings that a zombie Georgie might be lurking in the closet or under the bed, he could remember loving George better in here, and George loving him. In his effort to reconcile these two emotions, his love and his terror, Bill felt that he was closest to finding where final acceptance lay. Yeah. There were not things these were not things of which these were not of things. Oh my gosh, I can't read right now. There are like literally 2 more pages. We got this. We got this. We got this. These were not things of which he could have spoken. To his mind, the ideas were nothing but an incoherent jumble. But his warm and desiring heart understood, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes he looked through George's books. Sometimes he sifted through George's toys. He hadn't looked in George's photograph album since last December. Now, on the night after meeting Van Hanscom, Bill opened the door of George's closet, feeling himself, as always, to meet the side of George himself, standing in his bloody slicker amid the hanging clothes, expecting, as always, to see one pallid, fish-fingered hand come pistoning out of the dark to grip his arm. Took the album down off the top shelf. My photographs, the gold script on the front read. Below, scotch taped on, the tape was now slightly yellow and peeling. The carefully printed words, George Elmer Denbrough, age 6. Bill took it back to the bed Georgie had slept on, his heart beating heavier than ever. He couldn't tell what had made him get the photograph album down again, after all that had happened in December. A second look, that's it all. Just to convince yourself that it wasn't real the first time. That the real time was just your head playing a trick on itself. That the first time was just your head playing a trick on itself. Well, it was an idea anyway. It might even be true. But Bill suspected it was just the album itself. It held a certain mad fascination for him. What he had seen or what he had thought he had seen. He opened the album now. It was filled with pictures George had gotten his mother, father, aunts, or uncles to give him. George didn't care if they were pictures of people or places he knew or not. It was the idea of photography itself which fascinated him. He had been unsuccessful at pestering anyone into giving him new photos to mount. He would sit cross-legged on the bed, where Bill was studying now, and look at the old ones, turning the pages carefully, studying the black and white Kodaks. Here was their mother when she was young and possibly gorgeous. Here their father, no more than 18, one of a trio of smiling, rifle-toting young men standing over the open-eyed corpse of a deer. Uncle Hoyt standing on some rocks and holding up a pickerel for tuna at the dairy agricultural fair, kneeling proudly beside a basket of tomatoes she had raised. An old Buick automobile, a church, a house, a road that went somewhere to somewhere. All these pictures snapped by lost somebodies for lost reasons, locked up in a dead boy's album of photographs. Here, Bill saw himself at 3, propped up in a hospital bed with a turban of bandages covering his jaw. Bandages went down his cheeks and under his fractured jaw. The turban of bandages covering his hair. Bandages went down his cheeks and under his fractured jaw. He'd been struck by a car in the parking lot of the A&P on Center Street. He remembered very little of the hospital stay, only that had given him ice cream milkshakes through a straw, and his head ached dreadfully for 3 days. Here was the whole family on the lawn of the house, Bill standing by his mother holding her hand, and George, only a baby, sleeping in Zach's arms. And here, it wasn't the end of the book, but it was the last page that mattered, because the following ones were all blank. The final picture was George's school picture, taken in October of last year, less than 10 days before he died. In it, George was wearing a crew neck shirt, his flyaway hair slicked down with water. He was grinning, revealing 2 empty slots in which new teeth would never grow. Unless they keep growing after you died, Bill thought and shuddered. He looked at the picture fixedly for some time and was about to close the book when what had happened in December happened again. George's eyes rolled in the picture. They turned up to meet Bill's own. George's artificial say-cheese smile turned into a horrid leer. His right eye dropped close to a wink. See you soon, Bill. In my closet. Maybe tonight. Bill threw the book across the room, clapped his hands over his mouth. The book struck the wall and fell to the floor open. The pages turned, although there was no draft. The book opened itself to that awful picture again, the picture which said, School Friends, 1957-1958, beneath it. Blood began to flow from the picture. Bill sat frozen, his tongue a swelling, choking lump in his mouth, his skin crawling, his hair lifting. He wanted to scream, but the tiny, whimpering sounds crawling out of his throat seemed to be the best he could manage. The blood flowed across the page and began to drip onto the floor. Bill fled the room, slamming the door behind him. And that's the end of Chapter 5. We did it! Alrighty, woohoo! I wanted to see how long Chapter 6 is, but I don't think that no matter how long it is, we're going to go through it all because this seems like a very boring chapter. Unless we meet... Okay, let's see. Alright, let's see. We've got... You guys can also leave right now. I don't know if I'm going to read next week on Halloween. Halloween is going to be next Saturday. And I was planning on reading, but now I have actual plans for Halloween. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. I'd like to. I think that'd be really fun. Because, could you see down my shirt that entire time? Ugh. Oh, no. I thought it'd be really fun to read on Halloween because it's a horror book. So I thought that'd be really cool. But I have plans, but I don't know if I'd be able to, make it in time. Yeah, I'm not going to get through this entire chapter. I think we should aim for not a lot of pages because the beginning is really boring. I'll figure it out. It's not going to be all of Chapter 6 next time. It'll be a little bit of Chapter 6. So, get very excited. It might be on Halloween. It might not be. If I post an update about it, it'll be on my TikTok, which is quietly.screaming on TikTok. If you didn't know, I'll write it right over here in the chat so everyone can see. I'm really disappointed that this chapter wasn't what I thought it was. I don't know. I guess the chapter's not for a while. But I thought this was the chapter where, they all build the dam. I guess I was wrong. Whatever. I can't wait to get to that one, I guess. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out. I always have fun reading this with everyone. It kind of gets boring at times. It's a little difficult because I can't read properly, but I do enjoy everyone coming and watching these videos, even if it's not when it's live. They watch it later on. Still means a lot to me. People are hanging out and having fun. So I think with that, I'm going to say goodnight. Stay safe out there. Don't get killed by a clown. That'd be great. And I'll see you next time. Bye.